Imagine waking up one morning and not knowing who you are. Not in the poetic sense. It's not in the way people talk about finding themselves or losing their purpose. I mean literally. You open your eyes, and the person you were yesterday, your memories, your personality, your sense of self is simply gone. Wiped. Like someone reached inside your mind and erased everything that made you, you. Now imagine that this didn't happen by accident. Imagine someone did it to you on purpose. And imagine that the people who did it were doctors, scientists, men in white coats who called it progress. This is not a story from a dystopian novel. This is not a Hollywood thriller. This is something that actually happened. In real hospitals, to real people. People who trusted the medical system to heal them, and instead became the subjects of one of the most psychologically destructive experiments in modern history. This is the story of the forgotten experiment that broke its subjects. And once you hear it, you will never look at science, or power, or trust the same way again.
To understand how something this dark could happen, you have to understand the era in which it was born, the late 1950s. The Cold War is not just a political tension, it is an existential terror. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a silent war for global dominance, and both sides have come to the same frightening conclusion. The human mind might be the most powerful weapon on Earth if you could control how a person thinks. If you could erase loyalty, implanting new beliefs, manufacture obedience. You wouldn't need bombs. You wouldn't need armies. You would own people from the inside. The CIA had already begun exploring this territory. Their now infamous program was funneling money into experiments involving LSD, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation. The goal was simple and terrifying. Find a way to break a human mind, and then rebuild it according to your design. But the Americans were not the only ones chasing this dream. And within the world of psychiatry, there was one man who believed he was closer to the answer than anyone else. His name was Dr. Ewen Cameron, and he called his method psychic driving. Cameron was not some fringe lunatic operating out of a basement. He was, by every external measure, one of the most respected psychiatrists in the world. He was the first person to serve as president of both the American Psychiatric Association and the World Psychiatric Association. He had trained at some of the finest institutions in Europe and North America. He was charming, confident, and absolutely convinced of his own genius. He was also, beneath all of that prestige and polish, a man without limits. Cameron believed that mental illness could be cured, not through skillful patient therapy, but through something far more radical. He believed you could take a broken mind, destroy it completely, and rebuild it from scratch, like demolishing a condemned building to put up something new. The problem, of course, is that the building he was demolishing was a human being. He began his work at the Allan Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada, a Gothic stone mansion perched on the slope of Mount Royal that had been converted into a psychiatric hospital in 1943. It looked like something out of a ghost story, and in many ways, it was. His patients came to him with real problems: depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. Ordinary people who were struggling and who believed that coming to one of the world's leading psychiatrists would help them find their way back to health. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside those walls. Cameron's experiment began with a process he called deep. The theory behind it sounds almost reasonable when described in clinical language. He believed that certain psychiatric conditions were the result of deeply ingrained patterns of thought, loops of destructive thinking, hardwired emotional responses, behaviors that patients could not break free from on their own. His solution was to erase those patterns entirely, but the method he used to do it was nothing short of brutal. It started with sleep, or rather, the forced elimination of it. Patients would be kept awake for days at a time using stimulant drugs. Their minds would be pushed to the edge of exhaustion. And then, when they finally reached a state of total psychological fragility, Cameron would flip the switch in the other direction. He would put them to sleep. Not for a night, not for a week. 4 weeks, sometimes months at a time. Patients were sedated into a state of continuous sleep, kept unconscious through massive doses of barbiturates and other drugs. Some patients were kept in this induced sleep for 60 days, some for longer. While they slept, they replayed recordings, looped messages, repeated thousands of times, designed to reach into the unconscious mind and reprogram what was there. Cameron called this psychic driving. He believed that a sleeping, defenseless mind could be reached and reshaped through repetition. The messages were sometimes positive affirmations, suggestions, statements about behavior, but sometimes they were deliberately negative, designed to break down the patient's self-concept before the positive rebuilding could begin. Imagine lying unconscious in a small room, unaware of time passing, unaware of your own existence, while a voice plays over and over and over into your ears. 4 days, 4 weeks, but even that was not the most disturbing part. Because Cameron did not stop there, he combined the sleep with electroconvulsive therapy. Electric shocks delivered directly to the brain, and he did not use standard clinical doses. He used shocks that were, according to later medical analysis, between 30 and 40 times more powerful than what was considered medically acceptable at the time. These were not therapeutic shocks. They were blasts designed to cause maximum disruption to brain function, to literally scramble neural pathways, to force the brain into a state of such profound disorientation that the old patterns, tealed self, could not survive, and in many cases, they didn't. There were patients who came to the Allan Memorial Institute able to speak, able to remember their own names, their families, their histories, and left unable to do any of those things. One woman, a mother in her 30s, had checked herself involuntarily. She was experiencing anxiety. She thought she would be treated and sent home. Instead, she spent months in an induced sleep, subjected to repeated electroshock, and emerged not knowing where she was, not recognizing her own children, unable to perform basic daily tasks she had known how to do her entire life. She had to be taught how to dress herself, how to use a telephone, how to read. She had been, in the most clinical sense possible, erased, and she was not alone. Patient after patient emerged from Cameron's treatment with massive gaps in their memory. Childhoods gone. Relationships gone. Skills they had spent years developing gone. In several documented cases, patients regressed to states of behavior associated with early childhood: bedwetting, thumb-sucking, complete dependence on the nursing staff for the most basic functions. Cameron documented all of this. He observed it, recorded it, and did not stop. Because in his mind, this was not failure. This was the first stage of success. You had to destroy before you could rebuild. The blank slate was the goal. What he never adequately reckoned with was the possibility that some slates, once wiped, could not be written on again. What makes this story even more chilling, if such a thing is possible, is the question of who was funding it. Cameron was not working alone. He was not operating on a personal obsession, funded by his own savings. The money behind his research, channeled through front organizations and academic cover stories, came directly from the Central Intelligence Agency. This was confirmed in 1960 when a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered documents that had been ordered destroyed but survived through bureaucratic oversight. The documents showed that Cameron's work at the Allan Memorial Institute had been funded as part of the MK-Ultra program, specifically a sub-project known as MK-Ultra Sub-Project. Sub-Project 68. The CIA had not just been aware of what Cameron was doing. They had been paying for it. They wanted to know if a human being could be psychologically wiped and reprogrammed. They wanted to understand the limits of the mind's capacity for destruction and reconstruction. And Cameron, with his prestigious credentials and his complete lack of moral restraint, was exactly the kind of researcher they needed. What makes this even more morally grotesque is that the patients who were subjected to these experiments had not consented to be part of them. They had not signed up to test the CIA's theories about mind control. They were psychiatric patients who had come seeking treatment. They were, in the most fundamental sense, vulnerable people who had trusted the medical system to protect them. That trust was not just broken, it was weaponized. When the story began to emerge publicly in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the reaction was one of genuine disbelief. Not because people found it implausible that the government had engaged in unethical experimentation by then. MK-Ultra had already revealed a great deal of darkness, but because of the scale of the betrayal, because of the caliber of the man involved, because of how completely the victims had been abandoned, not just by Cameron, but by the institutions that should have been watching. The Canadian government had also provided funding for some of Cameron's work, channeled through the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, another CIA front organization operating under an innocuous name. The layers of institutional complicity ran deep. Cameron died in 1967. Before the full scope of what he had done was ever publicly exposed, he collapsed while mountain climbing in the Adirondacks and never faced legal consequences for his work. He died as a celebrated figure in his field, a man whose name was attached to prestigious organizations and institutional legacies. The reckoning came later, and it came through the people he had broken. In the 1980s, a group of former patients and their families filed a lawsuit against the CIA and the Canadian government. The case was eventually settled out of court. The CIA paid out compensation to a number of victims. Though the agency denied any wrongdoing, the Canadian government initially resisted acknowledging its role, but eventually also provided compensation to some of the affected patients. But money, in cases like this, is almost beside the point. What do you give someone who has lost their memory of their own childhood? What do you give a mother who can no longer recognize her children's faces? What do you give a person who came to a hospital as themselves and left as a stranger, living in their own body? There is no compensation that reaches that depth. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the aftermath was the way in which many of the victims spent years, sometimes decades, not knowing what had happened to them. They knew they had been in the hospital. They knew time had passed, but the precise knowledge of what had been done, the clinical details of the shocks and the sleep and the recordings, was hidden from them. They were left to live with the consequences of an experiment they had never been told they were part of. Some never recovered. Not fully. Not fully, not even partially. The neurological damage done by Cameron's extreme electroconvulsive protocol was not reversible. Memories that were destroyed in those sessions did not come back. The people who walked into the Allan Memorial Institute were not the same people who walked out, and for some of them, the person they had been before simply ceased to exist. That is not metaphor. That is medical reality. It is tempting when confronted with a story like this to locate it safely in the past, to say, this was a different time. Science did not know better. The Cold War created extreme pressures and extreme decisions. The institutions responsible have acknowledged what happened. Compensation has been paid, but that comfort is too easy. Because the truth is that Cameron's work was not the product of ignorance. His peers, even at the time, raised concerns about the ethics of his methods. The dosages he used for electroconvulsive therapy were not just aggressive, they were far outside established medical practice. Anec knew Italiano. The patients who came to him were not experimental subjects who had given informed consent. They were sick people seeking help, and he used their vulnerability as an opportunity. This was not a failure of knowledge, it was a failure of conscience. And conscience does not expire with an era. The question of what science is permitted to do to human beings, especially vulnerable human beings, did not get answered in the 1970s and walk away. It lives in every conversation we have about medical ethics, about the limits of research, about what happens when ambition and ideology convince a person that the ends justify the means. Cameron believed he was advancing human understanding. He believed, or at least told himself, he believed that the suffering he caused was a necessary price for a greater good. He was wrong. Not just morally wrong, practically wrong. His patients did not emerge as healed, rebuilt minds. They emerged as broken people. The great scientific theory that justified all of it, psychic driving into patterning as a cure for mental illness, was never validated. It produced no lasting therapeutic benefit. It produced only damage. The great irony of Cameron's work is that in trying to prove that the human mind could be erased and reprogrammed, he proved something quite different. He proved how fragile identity is, how deeply connected memory and selfhood are, how when you strip away a person's past, you do not create a blank canvas, you create a wound that cannot close. There is a woman, now elderly, whose case appears in the documented testimony from the class action lawsuit brought against the CIA and the Canadian government. She does not remember checking into the Allan Memorial Institute. She does not remember what she was being treated for. She does not remember the month she spent sedated in a small room while a voice played into her ears and electricity moved through her brain. What she remembers is waking up and not knowing where she was, not knowing who the man sitting beside her bed was. The man who was, in fact, her husband of 12 years. She remembers being confused by her own hands. She remembers staff members having to explain to her, repeatedly, what a toilet was and how to use it. She was 31 years old. She spent the years that followed rebuilding, not recovering. Recovering implies returning to something. She was building from almost nothing, learning the world again, being told stories about her own life that she could not verify through any personal memory, taking other people's word for who she had been. She said in her testimony that the hardest part was not the confusion of those early months. The hardest part was the grief that came later, when she understood fully what had been taken, when she realized that the person she had been before, the woman with a history, with a continuous experience of her own existence, was simply gone. Not damaged, not hidden behind trauma. Gone. She said it felt like mourning someone she had never known. Ewen Cameron's name is not widely known outside of academic circles. And them Cahotra researchers, it should be not to celebrate him, not even, primarily, to condemn him. Though condemnation is entirely warranted. But because forgetting what he did means forgetting what was done to his patients, and his patients deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have their stories told accurately and without flinching. They deserve to have the institutions that failed them named. They deserve to have the scientific and governmental establishments that enabled Cameron's work examined honestly, not allowed to retreat into the comfortable position of historical anomaly. Because it was not an anomaly. It was a choice. Made by one man, yes, but enabled by many, funded by governments, protected by prestige, hidden by classification. The experiment that Ewen Cameron ran at the Allan Memorial Institute was not the last time that vulnerable people were used as instruments of research without their consent. It was not the first. The history of medicine contains a long and painful thread of exactly this kind of violation, from Tuskegee to Guatemala to the radiation experiments conducted on unknowing patients during the Cold War. Each time these stories emerge, we go through the same process. Shock, disbelief, outrage, compensation, reform, and then, slowly, forgetting. The subjects of Cameron's experiments were broken in the most literal sense of that word, and the least we can do, the very least, is refuse to let their stories be broken too. Refuse to let them be buried in declassified documents and legal settlements and footnotes in the history of psychiatry. They were people. They had lives before they walked into that building. They deserved to keep those lives. That is not a complicated moral position. It does not require sophisticated ethics or academic philosophy. It is simply the truth. And some truths, no matter how deeply they are buried, have a way of refusing to stay forgotten.